supporting the event. I'm just here to introduce Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis is the Shadow Minister for Sustainable Economics and is working therefore in the Shadow Treasury Ministry with John McDonnell, and is going to talk to us about the Labour perspective on decentralised energy.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you. Lovely to be with you here today. Very quickly, many people ask me what is sustainable economics. I was asked by John McDonnell to come on board and take that up. I asked John what sustainable economics was, and he said, I don't know, that's for you to go and find out. We've been finding that out for the last few months. And to put it into a nutshell, it's basically how do you transition our economy to be able to, on a scientifically based footing, deal with the climate crisis that is approaching, but not just on decarbonisation, also on the other 8 planetary boundaries that are affecting and basically now being breached in so many places. So it's a tall order, but it's one I'm very proud to be working on, and hopefully in the next Labour government, whenever that may be. Unfortunately, my mentor and colleague, Adam Whitehead, who was meant to be here today, but for other reasons couldn't make it, he is I think many of you may know Adam Whitehead. He's an expert on this. I'm a mere grasshopper compared to Alan, who is the kind of Shaolin Kung Fu master when it comes to this issue. But I do know the energy system is changing. It's not changing fast enough for my liking, but it is changing fast. And the direction of travel is quite clear. It's what my colleagues call the 4D transition: decarbonisation, digitisation, democratisation, and decentralisation. And this transition will leave the UK's energy system transformed beyond all recognition. It's exciting, especially if you're someone like me who worries a great deal about climate breakdown. I'll be blunt here, the government does talk a good fight on this stuff, but I'm painfully aware of the damage the government have in reality done to the progress of this energy transition since 2015. I'm not trying to be partisan. I think from talking to people in this sector, that's something that many people hold to be true. And notwithstanding certain elements of my own party, who also still want to nationalise everything that isn't bolted down, Labour can see, you meant to laugh at that too much, Labour can see which way the wind is blowing on this towards a much more localised, decentralised system. I think with the ongoing collapse of the UK's new nuclear programme, this truth is becoming impossible to ignore, even for the government. Decentralised energy is going to have to ride to the rescue. So please buckle up and get ready for that ride. You guys are at the forefront of making that change happen, and the next Labour government is going to clear the way for you. Labour's ambitions for transformation of the energy system are of a magnitude not seen since the post-war years, and we expect to drive a massive growth in your sector when we finally take power. But what's absolutely critical as the old, dirty, centralised energy system is swept away by the new, clean, localised one, is that this new energy system also needs to be much fairer than the one we endure today. It's also true that in order for the promise of a smart, clean, flexible energy system to be realised, this new system will need to place people at its centre. In particular, the changes we know we need to make to the way that we heat our homes, fuel our transportation, and balance supply and demand on the grid would all require a radical shift from the passive role that people have played in the past. So I was delighted to see the Association's new report in making exactly this case. So one thing I would add, however, is that people are not merely consumers, and the consumer's perspective is not the only legitimate lens to shape this emerging energy system through. People are also citizens, and we collectively as a nation actually have very strong views about the kind of energy system we want as a whole, not just what we expect from those supplying our own energy needs as individual consumers. Luckily for you, the British public is strongly in favour of decentralised renewables, a preference that cuts right across the whole political spectrum. And they're also strongly in favour of a much more localised system. The UK's Energy Research Centre recent study into public views about paying for the energy transition revealed enthusiasm for the overall project and a strong appetite for an alternative model to the one we have today. Now, this is something which the decentralised energy sector should be well placed to address as this transition plays out. I should also say that Labour is looking at support at a much more diverse energy system than the monolithic model that dominates today. We think that municipal energy companies and community cooperatives will have a much bigger role to play in this new system, as well as SMEs and social enterprises. Meanwhile, giant multinational for-profits will have a greatly diminished role and, importantly, greatly diminished influence over the regulatory framework that determines the shape of that system. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me today, Tim. And I'm a huge admirer of the association's work, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today and to read your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clive. That's really encouraging to hear that the perspective, as you say, we hear mainly about the nationalisation of the energy system, but the idea that this could be much more participative and it could be a much fairer system, is I think something that people in this room would welcome. The report that you've got in front of you really is about this idea of participation. I watched a TED talk not that long ago called Why Diets Don't Work. And a woman made a fantastic presentation with loads of data and loads of information about the fact that basically dieting doesn't work in the longer term. And what was really interesting to me is that when I finished it and I thought about it, I felt very reluctant to believe it. The logic in my mind said diets work, it's going to work, it's got to be effective. But the evidence was very clear, and in that I had effectively what was going on is that my natural bias meant that I was very reluctant to accept the evidence that was in front of me. And perhaps the energy system is a little bit like that too. The energy system has a natural bias. It comes from a centralised system. The way in which we think about energy is a highly centralised approach. And in policy and regulation, which the ADE team is working, we see that every day. It's ingrained and it's a natural way of doing things. We see the energy system through a prism of centralisation. And when we were writing this report, one thing that really struck me was that one of the central reasons why it's such a challenge is that decarbonisation needs energy customers, their final energy user, to be changing the decisions that they're making. They need to make decisions which help this energy system decarbonise and keep it secure, as well as meet their needs. They are responsible for decisions for account for approximately 60% of greenhouse gas emissions across heating and across transport. It is customers that buy cars and vehicles. It is customers that are installing boilers or heat pumps in their homes and their offices. But also the popular acceptance and support for decarbonisation, I think, is going to evaporate unless the energy customer is brought along the journey. We've gone an awful long way. We heard about how much progress we've made. But if we're going to go the rest of the way, if we don't take customers with us, if customers don't feel like they are beneficiaries of that system, if they feel that they're just bearing cost and risk for others, then the political support for the transition will evaporate. And the cost of decarbonisation, oddly, will rise. So the report that you have in front of you is basically saying that as we go into the next stage of the energy decarbonisation, we've seen great decarbonisation in the electricity system, but we now really start having to tackle heat and power. The only way that we are really going to successfully achieve that in a cost-effective way is by finding a way for energy customers to participate in the system. And we have got to find a way to think differently about how we approach it. Currently, the system is divided into silos that work for the energy system: power generation, networks, gas, energy efficiency, renewables, fossil. They all work very well if you're the Secretary of State, and they all come together. But if you're the energy customer, you sit there and you experience a confusing patchwork of policies on this area and that area, and none of them come together. We had a discussion in the office saying if you have a house which has got an oil-fired boiler and a roof and a householder that uses a car, which should they do first? Should they put solar on their roof? Should they put a heat pump in? Or should they buy an electric vehicle? Policy doesn't tell you right now. There's support for all of them, but you don't know which you should do first. So we have got to start to think of the energy system from a different perspective, and that is really what your businesses are about and what this report is about. It's about saying we've got to start with the energy customer. You've got to think from how the energy customer sees the system. They're interested in being warm, they're interested in being mobile, and they're interested in being powered. And they don't actually care about how it's achieved as long as it's affordable and it's reliable. We need to start designing our policy framework and our regulatory framework from that perspective. And if we do that, we might end up with a system where the energy customer, rather than feeling like the energy system is imposed upon them, They feel like they're a beneficiary and a participant, and we will actually end up with a cost-effective, decarbonised economy. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.